Okay, here we go.
Test, 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 test.
Roll music?
Let's roll it.
Welcome to the Unknown Morning Show.
It's the show where we explore radio,
Podcasting,
TV,
gear,
gearheads,
and making money with a hot mic and other stuff too.
This is the Unknown Morning Show.
I'm Mandee Montana.
And I'm Chuck McKinley. We had our first episode, Mandee, talking about origins, how we got interested into broadcasting, first jobs, etc., etc., etc. I started, and when I always say Austin, being we're in Texas, I always go, that's Minnesota. Austin, Minnesota.
That's right. Yeah.
But my first job was 15 miles from my hometown, which is Blooming Prairie, Minnesota.
Nice.
Southern Minnesota, northern Iowa. It's on the border there, about 20 miles from Iowa. And my first gig, like anything else, it was overnights, and I was babysitting the Larry King Show, which is you did inserts and weather inserts and stuff.
Really?
Because during the day, we were a rock and roll station, and it was so interesting because rock and roll station, Osmonds in the morning, Foreigner by midday, and what you could get away with at night. It was really, and it was fun, and it was really a family-type situation and family-oriented as far as we had a bowling team, a softball team. When I say that, that's sort of close.
The staff did?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, yeah. And it was something to where, somebody would, one of the guys had a big house that he was renting and basically say, okay, party night tonight. And, of course, we're young and 19 and 20 years old.
Yeah.
We did
How many were on your staff? Because by the time I got into radio, around 2002, staffs were starting to thin out. So I'd imagine in that day, what year was that, Chuck?
I always like to say, this is in 1977, and I always referred to it as 5-on-5, which is a nice way of saying 5 full-timers, probably 4 or 5 part-timers.
Wow.
That you had. And probably we had about 3.
Yeah.
But yeah.
3 reliable ones.
Yeah.
2 that were sort of flakes and trying to figure out whether or not this was their gig.
Well, and that was, and that
was normal then.
Yes. And that was the thing too that, there was radio automation at the time, but it was a totally different animal because it was, I don't know if you
was
ever.
Was it carts?
Carts and reel-to-reel tape.
Yeah, yeah.
And so.
I encountered both.
Yeah. It was the battleship way where you used the pegs to set things up.
No, we didn't have the automation.
Yeah.
We just had carts and reel-to-reel. So,
we had an AM-FM combination. The AM was top 40 rock and roll. The FM at the time was beautiful music. And even at that time, FM was really not well established. When the station went country, KAUS FM, FM 100 country, in 1980, that was a big deal.
Yeah.
It was a 100,000 watt border banger on Minnesota and Iowa. And it ruled as far as getting numbers for country for everybody, in like a 4-county area for a good 15 years.
Well, I'm not a radio historian by any means, but I have been curious about it. I was a listener pretty much since birth, and then I started becoming like a mega fan whenever I was in my teens before doing it. But during that time, the charts were changing too, right? Because for a long time, the Billboard charts were pop charts, but that encompassed country. There wasn't a Billboard country chart until that became like really recognized until when? Like the 60s, 70s?
Yeah. I mean, I think Billboard's always been the king, but there was a time when I was a music director in the 80s and in the 90s, there was also Gavin.
Okay.
And there was Billboard, there was Gavin, radio and records.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. R&R.
So, so what I would do is, and when I was, especially when I was in Milwaukee and in Tyler when I came here, I mean, I would sit there on any given week, and I would have all 3 charts available. I would just sit there and look just to get a feel. And then on the stations I worked at, I would always track requests. And in both Milwaukee and in Tyler, I would send out our weekly surveys to local record shops here like Munt Music Longview. There was a record shop in Longview on Judson Road. I forget about the name because what I do remember is when I was at the ranch, we didn't have any Buck Owens, and I found a Buck Owens CD there that I needed. But I would send them the survey with a questionnaire, asking, what's hot, what's not, and I would stress, I don't need specifics, but what I needed to find a vibe.
Yeah.
oh, this Neil McCoy song is,
What's selling locally?
yes,
Yeah.
just something. And when I had something, whether it was maybe rodeo tickets or food passes or whatever,
Yeah.
I'd mail them to him and say thanks,
Oh, nice.
Well, it's the only thing you could do. I mean, it's not like I had not a lot of disposable income.
No. I feel like that's an episode in and of itself. But you mentioned something on our first episode, and you kind of jumped around there because I asked you a weird question.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Milwaukee. So you were 13 or 15 miles from home.
Yeah.
In Austin, but eventually you were in Milwaukee.
Well, what happened was I had been on the air about 3 years.
Okay.
And I would air check myself diligently, but there was one day that I was listening and I was thinking, wow, you're sounding really good. And I listened, and I was terrified, horrified. It was awful. And so I started listening to myself more and harder and more with a critical ear. Mm-hmm. And then I was building air checks. At the time, I'd heard about a gentleman named Pat Martin. Pat was at WSPT in Stevens Point and WQ. I forgot the call letters of the country station on the AM side. Pat had a reputation of finding talent, developing talent, sending it on its way. Like the Stevens Point person maybe would go from Stevens Point to nights in Rockford or mornings in Rockford and maybe in Chicago. And he developed this real big heavy rep. People knew who he was. He was like the Billboard Top 40 program director of the year three times. And he'd done it, in Stevens Point. So I sent Pat a tape and resume, and he calls me back and he said, well, I don't have room for you, but it's interesting. You have some really good basics, and I think we can work together. And so when I get an opening, I'll call you.
How did that feel?
I was drunk for the weekend. I was so happy. So Pat calls me back about maybe 2-3 months later, and he said, look, I've accepted a job at WBCS in Milwaukee. They're a country station. They need an overnighter. Tape and resume, send it to Terrell Matheny. Now, Terrell, at the time, general manager there and legendary in the business. People knew who Terrell Matheny was. His son, Kevin, was also the general manager in New York at WNBC. He was the guy that fired...
Not WNBC.
He fired Howard Stern.
I wondered.
He was Pig Vomit.
Really?
Yeah.
So you sent your tape and resume to Pig Vomit's dad?
Dad, yes. And
wow.
So I get hired to Milwaukee, $800 a month.
Damn.
$800 a month.
Yeah, but what year was this?
This was in 1981. And you know what? I didn't think twice because I was working at a radio station in Minnesota. I was getting we were getting the surveys from WOKY, the Mighty 92, Bob Berry, Steve Stevens. I'd read about WZMF, which is an alternative station in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, a suburb that was this legendary station. Bob Reitman, it gave birth to alternative in the Midwest.
Oh, man.
So I remember going to Milwaukee and then listening to in Minnesota, I could get WLS in Chicago at night and hear, John Records, Landecker, Jeff Davis, Yvonne Daniels doing overnights. She was wonderful. She had this really smooth delivery. And I'd get there, and it was like being in the valley of the gods in broadcasting. I would listen, I would go, oh, I'm toast. I'm awful.
Yeah, but you get better when you're around people that are better than you.
Yeah.
You know, like that's where you got to go to make that happen.
But I was living in Cudahy, Wisconsin, which was maybe 10 miles out on the lakefront in Milwaukee.
Nice.
$800 a month. My Saturday night, I would go to Subway, and I'd get a Subway footlong. I would get a bag of potato chips. I would get a quart of Coke. I would watch Saturday Night Live and SCTV, and that was it. That was my Saturday night.
Nice.
And you know what? I was proud and pleased. I was at my station that I worked at. I think it was maybe the second book, became number one in Milwaukee. We had an 8.3 share.
Wow.
Which, understand, Milwaukee at that time, urban area, blue-collar rock stuff, country, number one. And I'll never forget.
You did have some help from Urban Cowboy, didn't you?
Absolutely.
Thank you, John Travolta.
Kenny Rogers. Kenny Rogers, Dolly, Reba's just starting to pop a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, Milwaukee Journal does a story. And it's kind of a side story about, this kid's up from Austin, Minnesota.
What?
And he's in, yeah. Oh no, I need to bring it for show and tell one day.
Yeah, I would love to see it.
Because I have it laminated in my stuff.
Cool.
The picture of me, I'm wearing like a nice sweater and it's a headshot. I got the Fu Manchu and the long hair going.
Yeah, yeah.
But when you pull it back, I'm standing in a snowdrift. I have the original picture. It's hilarious.
Okay, so you mentioned Chuck McKinley. We didn't get into this on the first episode of me with my origin of my name.
Yeah.
But, our names are not our names.
No.
So, I mean, we don't have to go into what our legal names are, but you had a name prior to Chuck McKinley that I find highly entertaining and that I've called you like as in jest over the years once I learned that this was your other radio name.
The rock and roller thing.
Yeah,
huh?
will you share it?
Well, the funny part about it is it lasted one day.
One day, that was it?
Oh, Chuck, the rock and roller. And, and the funny, here's the funny part. My program director, remember, it's during disco, okay?
Yeah.
So my program director, his name is Dwayne Germain, right?
Was that his actual name?
Champagne Dwayne Germain is what he called himself. And I get called out on that. But it was hilarious. And, people still have a little bit of a hoo-ha about that, but yeah.
Well, Luscious Eyes wanted to call me Mandee-licious for a hot second when I was on the Blaze. And my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, was like, no. I was like, that's probably a good decision. Let's not do that.
I had to do a commercial for the Blaze when I was there.
Yeah.
And I forget what it was. I think it was for one of the gentlemen's bars. And I said, and the phrase was, "It's sextacular." And to this day.
Sextacular?
Yeah, sextacular.
Wow.
To this day, every once in a while, Ice will sit there and either message me or see something on Facebook and write. Same deal when I was at KYKX. I had a commercial for one of the gentlemen's bar. And literally, Chuck, you do it. I go, well, why? Well, because, I don't want to do this. So I remember I used something, I forget what it was, Def Leppard or something as background music for this bar, gentleman's bar. And we get an email, somebody complaining about it. They go, and the music sucked too. And I was like, the music sucked? Well, I was kind of happy with that. But yeah, I worked for Pat in Milwaukee. I learned about air check sessions with him.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Oh, air check sessions. Oh, terrifying.
I mean, I've had some great ones, and then I've had some where I'm going to just,
I would sit there and,
and
all of us would have our tape. You'd go into your cassette and you'd try to find a good spot. And Pat would kind of like play with his mustache, put it in the recorder, and rewind it and just go, oh.
Well, I have a question about this because I've done air check sessions with a variety of people over the years.
Yeah.
People I respected, one that I did not at all. And this is like, there are different ways to go about this, right?
Yes.
I believe there's a difference between coaching someone and criticizing someone.
Sure.
And so that leads into the not respecting this person. He was very critical. But the thing that that particular air check session was awful. But the biggest part that bothered me was he didn't actually listen to my air check before he sat down with me and we listened to it together.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, I feel like you did when we did air check sessions together whenever we worked together.
Yeah.
And then we did them with consultants and stuff. And I feel like it's a common practice maybe to listen to the air check before you sit down with the talent.
Yeah.
And then listen to it with them and have a conversation with them about what was strong and what was weak and where we feel like there's need for improvement. Like,
right? Yeah, sure. And the other thing to do is, you have notes. You have notes that say specifically, this is an air check session. It's the date and time. These are the notes.
Like an agenda.
Yeah. And then you copy it and you give it to the air talent, A, for reference, and B, the other thing, unfortunately, let's say you have an air talent that's not going to follow orders. It's something to where you can go back from their jacket and say, look, this is the deal. You're not doing this. Right. But that's the deal, is to always have a paper trail too,
Yeah. And Pat did that with you?
Yeah. We would sit there. But, oh man, it was nerve wracking. But he was so.
Was he direct?
He was direct. He was kind. I remember one time, and back then I lacked tact sometimes, and I was a dick to a listener one time, and they called and they complained like they rightly should have. And Pat called me and he said, look, here's the deal. This happens again, you're gone. You are fired. call this person and apologize. And I said, yes, sir. And I called, apologized. Well, this listener became like a regular caller, regular listener.
Yeah.
But one of the things I learned later in my career when it came to listeners and their questions, they just want an answer. And they want somebody to talk to them.
Yeah.
One of my favorite ones is when I was at the ranch, we carried Longview Lobo High School football.
Yeah.
And I had a listener email and said, I'm not going to listen to you because I don't care about football, so I'm going to quit listening. So I called this lady and I said, look, ma'am, okay, so I'm understanding this right. When Longview football comes on, you're not going to listen. Correct. Okay, so let's say Longview runs the gamut. They go to state. That's like 14, 15 weeks. That's, let's say, 60 hours over that time. She goes, okay, so I'm going to make a deal with you. Would you do me a favor? Please, if you go away and don't listen, will you come back? And she said, okay. And I said, okay, we got a deal.
That's so nice. And I love the way you talked her through that. I know you did something similar for me with a situation where by the time you and I were like rocking and rolling, working together, we'd maybe been working together for a year and a half. And
sure,
you really trusted me. I felt like we had a really good professional working relationship. There was a listener that had called in while I was not in the studio, because at that time we were doing some voice tracking to allow me to help you with promotions and things in the back end. This listener wanted to be heard, sent a nasty email to me. And if I remember correctly, you offered to call this gentleman, and you did. And you heard what he had to say.
Yes.
And then you very politely said, well, now, Mandee's my employee. She was doing what I asked her to do that day. And these are some of the things that Mandee does when she's not in the studio. And it was a laundry list of things.
Yes.
And he very kindly was like, I had no idea. I thought she just sat in the room for 4 hours and played music.
Yeah.
Which is fine. My job was to make you think that, right? Like,
yes.
and I did my job well.
Yeah.
He emailed me all the time, just conversationally after that, and was like kind of like what you're saying with your situation. He just needed to be heard.
Yeah.
He had no context, and it's like the funny thing about what we did was so public and so fun in perception that people felt like they were part of it.
Absolutely.
And so they felt like they had a piece of it. And so they could tell us if we didn't do something right. Where like you and I would never like walk into, I'm just going to make something up, like AutoZone and tell somebody that they weren't selling their parts correctly.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
Like customer service might have a conversation about, but like you organized that shelf badly. You should put the spark plugs on aisle 4, not aisle 6 or whatever. Like
sure.
But that's essentially what people would call in and sometimes say. And so finding a way to like communicate well and to be receptive like you did, I mean, that's an important part of the job.
And customer service, I mean, I've had people call when I was programming, we had a gospel show in the morning, and all of a sudden it was being interrupted by a half-hour segment, live segment. I forget exactly what it was, and there was a very nice lady that called in and was frustrated by it, and I just told her, I said, I understand what you're saying. I don't like the interruption myself. I'd rather have it before or after. It interrupts the flow. But I'm going to tell you something. In the business of broadcasting, commerce wins every time.
Yeah.
That's just the way it goes. That's all you can do. But yeah, I had to laugh because in my stint in Milwaukee with working for Pat, he was just a terrific program director. I ended up going on to my other station I worked at, WMIL 1061.
Oh.
And it was an expansion franchise. I've never been, the only place I've been at where I was there when they flipped the switch. It was, I believe, Chicago market, but I think it was in Janesville, Wisconsin, and it was bought, and the signal was brought to Milwaukee.
Okay.
We're in Waukesha, which is like, I don't know, 10 miles outside of Milwaukee proper, center of Milwaukee, but yeah, we were there. So and it was just us. Even though WOKY, the sister station, they were like in the big palace in downtown Milwaukee. We were out there. The country guys.
Oh.
The guys who are next door to a Holiday Inn with a bar, that's us. But yeah, that was...
I feel like you might have visited that bar once or twice, Chuck.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Craig Scott, one of my program directors, we would walk in there and he would just say, hey, We play country music on the radio.
Oh, how funny.
And he would get loaded and he would start laughing and his plate would slip from his teeth. And it was hilarious. But
wow.
But we had so many changes, Mandee. I think over a 3-year period, we had like 3 ownership changes, 3 or 4 PDs, program directors, a couple GMs. So when they finally came for me, I remember Doug Keel fired me and he said, it's just your time. And I never,
what a weird thing to say.
I never understood it. It hurt my feelings. I didn't understand it. I ended up moving to Tyler. And I remember getting...
That's how you got to Tyler.
Yeah.
You went from...
Yes.
Okay.
I remember getting to like Kansas City and going, what have I done?
That's a long drive.
Yeah. And then it was explained to me, Texas is so big, it takes, 17 hours to cross. It's a 17-hour drive, I believe, from Tyler to Minnesota. There was one time I did it nonstop and, it was delusional for about a day.
Yeah.
After that. But yeah, that's how I got to Tyler.
At what point did you know you were like a lifer?
Oh,
was it in Austin? Was it before you got to Milwaukee?
No, it was before I got to Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And then I've never in my mind thought I'm going to quit. I've thought maybe I may have to quit just because now radio is basically, and it's gotten a lot better, I think, in terms of, there was the initial shot back in the late 90s where they would clean out a market and, the corporation would come in and, if you were a veteran performer, you were fired.
Yeah, you're making too much money.
Making too much fun. And I think a lot of things would be, well, you're a veteran.
Inflexible.
Thank you. That's the word. Yeah. Inflexible and, that sort of thing. And I think what they found out in a fair amount of situations is, you fire the person that's been there 20 to 30 years. That's going to hurt yourself somewhere. That's going to hurt ratings. That's going to hurt ratings, which means it hurts bottom line. Mm-hmm. And they're all about bottom line.
I think that oftentimes the corporations don't understand because they come in with, they're looking at numbers. They're not thinking about people. And radio is a people business. They don't think about the relationship that the listener has with the talent. As a listener, like take the me working in it out of the equation. As a listener, I often have felt like I was friends with the person that was on the air, having never met them. Probably the best example of that for me has been as a listener of the Kid Craddock Morning Show. I mean, I feel like I know those guys.
Oh, yeah.
They talk so much about their life and their family and, they're interested in things I'm interested in as far as pop culture and music.
Sure.
So I've felt like I was part of the show.
They're syndicated. Now, I should say
they're that good at it.
Sure, and there's voice track people in this market. Jen Austen is a good example.
She's fantastic.
I mean, I can just hear her and I go, well, you're talking to me, which is the
gold.
Best. Yeah, the gold standard. It is the best example. You're hitting when somebody says it sounds like you're talking to me.
And if you take that out of the equation, like you're saying, removing the veteran broadcasters or people that they would assume are inflexible, what they don't realize is they're severing that relationship.
Sure.
So then the thing that was pulling that person in to stay loyal to that station, despite the music, which oftentimes is the most important thing, right? Are you playing my favorite song?
Absolutely.
But that tie of that relationship with that, especially morning shows, right? Because it's the first thing you're listening to when you get up in the morning, or it used to be for most people. Like that's a big miss. And it happened, to go back to the first episode, we were talking about Sunny 106.5 when they took Dave Moreland off the air.
Oh, yeah.
When that happened, when Access One came in and bought out East Texas Radio Group and they took Dave Moreland off, it was a lot of radio drama. We won't get into that this episode. But that and taking Paul Harvey off in the afternoons, massive mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, it decimated that radio station's ratings and revenue.
Sure.
And it never recovered.
Well, I think
recovered.
The current thought about Sunny was that, well, they're this kind of sleepy pop station. Mm-hmm. They're playing this slow music. That's Delilah at night. Who needs it? Mm-hmm. And it's become the lesson that's been enduring now for a decade. And
that was 2006, I think.
Yeah. And it went, 20 years almost. And that is
maybe 5.
Don't screw with the winning formula.
Yeah, man. I would just remember because that was when I was part-time at KYKX when all that went down. And then I came over to the ranch to work full-time. Yeah. And I just remember I was so impressionable and I was still learning about the business. And so I was paying really close attention to all that was happening. And I was like, it'll be really interesting to see how this goes down. And then I was there till 2011, so I saw like it never recovered.
Our old radio station KKUS did that thing where they shifted out their morning show, and basically for 3-4 hours in the morning, Monday through Friday, they are a top 40 contemporary country station. And if you look at their ratings, it's reflected. It's cut them in half. It's blown them up. And, you know, I mean, you have to be smart about stuff. One of the things at the ranch, and I think that we were smart about, and I've railed against it, is where you have, I hate morning shows that essentially, or stations that have a morning show that's just a talk show.
Yeah.
You play a little music. I mean,
I know you don't have the appreciation for the Craddock morning show that I do.
I don't.
And I respect and understand your position.
No, I understand. I understand the one thing about the Craddock show is, you know, when you have the host who dies and you still are able to keep it afloat, that's unbelievable because, you know.
I was there when it happened, man. I had just come to mix July 1st and Craddock passed like 3 weeks later.
Radio is such a delicate animal because sometimes it's a show, sometimes it's a person. I've been in situations where at the place that I work now, John Sims passed.
Yeah.
And he has been in the market for, I think he was in the market 42 years. He was with KTBB for 25, and it's hard to replace that experience. Anything that I know on news, I would just watch him and Melissa Kaiser and listen a lot. You know, and Paul Gleiser, the owner and general manager of the station, I mean, his thoughts on any story was like, well, is it interesting? Do we care?
Yeah.
Why should we care? So when I put stories together for the 5 o'clock news, every time it's like, you know, well, why do we care? Should we care about this? What's the hook in this?
Yeah.
You know, has the network done it right? You know, in terms of, and I don't mean like content. I mean, sometimes it's actual things like, does the lead in match the story? Or sometimes the lead in will be like the first 2 lines of the story match up. And it's like, no, you want to have it to where there's a flow to it. And sometimes, well, I've got to upcut the story or I've got to rewrite something to make it work, you know. And then, you know, I always vet the stories when I'm done. You know, are the levels correct? Is everything okay? Did I cut it up right? And then I hand everything over with notes to our night guy or to our 5 o'clock guy. I go, there you go.
Yeah.
I've got the groceries. You put the meal together.
So you've done a variety of stuff throughout your career. If you weren't in radio, what would you do?
I'll tell you what I did do a couple times.
Okay.
I did cable sales back in 1989 for a year. And let me tell you, brutal. I came out of it with a really large appreciation for people that sell. You know, for people that walk up to somebody and say,
I got something you need.
And yes, and I want your money. Lonnie Johnson at KTBB explained it to me even better. He says, we're asking for money on something that they can't
physically hold.
They can't physically hold. And it's probably going to take 13 weeks for them to even feel it.
Selling potential.
Yeah. It's like the whole thing about broadcast remotes where people do remote broadcast.
Yeah.
I can tell you on one hand, over 40 years, ones has been really, really successful. Because most of the time, you know, you think about it, they were held on weekends, held on Saturdays. You know, people are running around doing everything.
They might stop by for a free T-shirt, then they take off.
As I've gotten this last job, I guess I appreciate it even more because it's just a different skill sets being into play. You know, like I'm a lot more involved on our website as far as rewriting stories and doing things with that.
Yeah.
Which I wasn't before. I mean, I had to do like we have to do a weekend stint where we do that, but you know, now it's a daily thing. Every day there's something. I mean, and you know, I'll prepare stories, but then I like to say the soft part of the day where I have time to, you know, well, do we have things we can't add in our state content? How about our local content? What's going on? If we have local content, is it something right now that we can put a story together that can we assign it that goes on the 5 o'clock and tomorrow morning? Which I find humorous because 20, 30 years ago, you know, when my wife said, you should be in news, I'm like, oh, shut up. And so now it's like, you know, or, you know, one of the guys will say, we have a story about, you know, power outages. What do you think? You know, do we do it? Do we do a voicer on it?
How significant?
Is it, yeah, how significant? Or, one of the things that's, John taught me, if it's a story that's really going to possibly change, leave it as it is. And he would say, don't do weather stories.
Yeah, because it's always changing and you might get it wrong.
Exactly.
So speaking of 20 to 30 years ago, this is something that I learned pretty early in the business that I didn't know before I got started, is that just about everybody that's a DJ has a side gig.
Sure.
You're doing something else to make money because there is this perception that because you're on the radio,
we're rich.
That you're rich. Well, it's and this is speaking as a female. I don't know from a male's perspective because I've never really asked, but
rich in spirit.
I felt like I was making on par with about what a teacher would be making whenever I entered into radio.
Yeah.
And then kind of as I progressed too, like as far as like the, what am I trying to say? Cost of living raises and stuff. I mean, it was never something where I was making millions, not even like six figures was like the goal, but that wasn't going to happen in Tyler, Texas.
No.
So,
that's when you trade in on your name a little bit and try to get gigs and stuff.
So talk a little bit about side gigs. Like, what was your first side gig that you did, and what did that look like?
Mobile DJ service.
Yeah.
I put that together. I had the idea in '95.
Okay.
But I had to acquire music, and at the time I was music director at KNUE in town. And so what I did, I would sit there and let's pretend with Arista Records, I would one of their artists would add it. And I'd say, hey, can I get something from your catalog?
Yeah.
And most of them were really receptive. I mean, there was like the Sony music people sent me their catalog.
Wow.
And said,
okay.
Well, we got to spread this out, but put your list together. And I did that. And so,
nice.
But it took me probably a year and a half to get the music, to catalog it, to figure out how I wanted to catalog it, I got some app online that I did where I cataloged it, and then to get the money to actually buy my gear. And so that was something to where, and then once I started doing it, it probably took me a good 18 months to go from where guys like Doc Deason, Kenny Smith, Dave Goldman would say, oh, here's this guy.
I'm booked, but here he is.
Yeah. So, and I remember my first 2 years, it was 18 gigs a year. And then it took me a couple, 3-4 years where I was getting, 30, 40, 50 gigs a year.
Wow. So there were some weekends where you were doing 2 gigs a weekend then.
Maybe. Yeah. There was a couple. And,
there's 52 weeks in a year.
Yeah. And 50 gigs. 50 gigs that's
a lot.
It could be a load, but I enjoyed it. I mean, doing.
Well, you were good at it. You DJ'd my junior prom.
Yay. Doing dances was, and the kids' dances presented its own challenge because when I first started doing it, I thought mistakenly that maybe I could just do old school and get away with it, and I couldn't. And so I ended up immersing myself in rap music and alternative and editing and doing my own stuff with it and presenting that. And it was funny doing edited rap stuff because kids,
they know.
Yeah, they didn't like it.
I remember at junior prom, you played Nelly's Ride With Me.
Yes.
And I don't remember what part you edited it, but we all just kind of looked at you because you're like, I think it's missing a word.
Yes.
We're like dancing. What? Yeah. Okay, we're going to keep dancing.
And adult dances were a totally different animal too.
I'm sure.
But, you did this and it was something to where... And when I say adult, I don't mean like bad adult. I mean, it would be something to where maybe it was more oldies rock oriented or it'd be a mixture of country and rock. I remember one time I was at the Southwest Holiday Inn for,
you're not playing the stanky leg for grown folks. They're not asking for that.
I remember, it was like Love Shack and everything.
Yeah.
And it was one of those gigs where it was supposed to be from 7 to midnight. And literally it went to about 1:30 to where, and somebody would say, oh, well, how long do we got? Can we keep it? I go, well, as long as they want, but, make sure I get paid, okay? And I never forget, a guy was on the bar dancing and screaming, Chuck McKinley is a king. And I'm going, well, yes, I am. But then I've been at dances where Rosanna's been with me and I've leaned over and I go, all right, we're going to play Love Shack. If this doesn't work, we're going home.
Yeah.
But I've never had that.
You learned how to read the room. Like there's such a there's a skill to that. There's an art when you're a mobile jock or a performer, like in a band too, or where you can kind of read what's vibing with people. And I'll be honest, you helped me get set up to do that, and I did it for a few years. That was a skill that I never really developed.
Well, to me, it was a challenge. It was fun. It was kind of scary too, because if it's not working. But, I would have, and there would be things like, you have, there's kids dances, there's adult dances. Also, there was weddings, which is, weddings have their own.
Weddings are why I quit.
Weddings it's their own because I would explain to bride and grooms. I said, look, we're going to have 20 minutes before. This would be like if I was actually doing music during the wedding. It's okay. Well, this is going to be totally just mellow. And, a couple minutes beforehand, I'll announce to have everybody sit down. And then, any songs you need during the wedding, I'll do it. And then, once usually you would be in that phase where everybody's, eating or kind of getting settled. I would just put on background pop.
Yeah.
Background pop until it was time to do what they wanted to do, the first dance and whatever. And then, I would explain ahead of time. I said, look, we're going to play some oldies right away, the twist and stuff. And our main goal is to get Dad and Grandpa out there to dance. We want to get photo ops. We want to get that taken care of along with what you're doing. And then we're going to kind of and I'll just make an announcement, a general announcement about let's do requests. And then we'll just see where this goes. And that's how it would work.
Such a pro, man. You remember everything that you said, and you haven't been doing, I think you told me previously that
you were my last.
I was your last. Our wedding.
When you and Aaron got married, I haven't done it since. And it's just,
it was such a treat to have. It was so special to me that you DJ'd that.
I had fun.
It was such a gift.
I had fun, and it's it was lovely seeing. I'm a sucker for love. What can I tell you?
Oh, thanks. Thanks, friend.
But yeah, and then I spent a couple of years doing some freelance voice work.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, with Eric Johnson's company, and their whole voiceover situation. It was interesting because it had to do with high school football. Let me rephrase that: high school and college sports, and their whole thrust. It was genius on how they got it going. That's a separate story, but basically the whole thing is we want to make sure that clean music is played during these events.
Yeah, we should do an episode on that because we both worked with that company for a while doing freelance, and then you went to work full time with Eric for a while. Yeah,
yeah. So I did freelance for like 6 years with them, and usually what would happen is. The fall was always a ton of work.
Sure.
And I just got burned out on it between that and because at my first stint at KTBB, I was the production director and I also did news. I'd substitute for news when people were gone. It was usually middays. So I was usually there at 6 a.m. till about 7 p.m, which is, you have to process and do production stuff.
Right, around
news. When I left, I told Jeff Rourke, who's my boss now but took over, I said, here's the deal. You're going to be doing a sprint and a marathon at the same time. And he said, man, it's always stayed with me. I said, well, it's true. I mean, you're running as fast as you can. You're trying to prep for, your news that's coming up. And I just learned ways to sit there and walk in, take care of production stuff, take care of commercials, and then go and build things through the day and made sure that things could flex for me if I had to substitute news out, you know, and do that. So, but yeah. And that was a great learning experience. But, in retrospect, I look at win, lose, or draw, everything is a learning experience.
Oh, for sure.
If I've gotten fired, I've learned from it. When I was in Charleston, West Virginia, it didn't go well. I learned from it. I mean, I didn't like it. It was a horrible time. It was a lonely time. It was right before Roseanne and I got married, but I learned a lot from it. And, that's all you can ask.
Is that something you'd want to do a whole episode on sometime?
Charleston?
Yeah.
That almost sounds like a mini-series. It would be episode 7, Charleston.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, you've told me some stories from that time, and I feel like they weren't a 2-minute story. I feel like it was kind of a long thing. I don't know if you'd want to go into that or not.
It was the only thing I really learned. It's nothing. I'd sent a tape out, and this was in about 80.
So you were in Tyler?
86. I was about 86, 87. Okay. I sent a tape out. And the headquarters was in Evans. I'm sorry. The regional program director was in Evansville, WSTO. It was top 40 states. So I sent it there. Guy calls me back and he says, I have an opening in Charleston for middays. And you have a really different voice that would be really different for that place. I go, oh, okay. And so I get hired and I go there. But it's one of those things that when I walked in, I could feel it immediately that I wasn't, maybe not welcome, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, because I've worked, I mentioned a regional programmer on the first episode that I worked for, and he was fantastic, Vince Richards.
Yeah.
Vince was kind of an interim operations manager for us at Town Square for a little while, and we got along great. He hired somebody to come in and be our operations manager, who is also the person that I mentioned that gave me the worst air check of my life.
Okay.
And that guy didn't last very long because he was a wild card, and that's a whole other story. But it was a similar situation where I got along really well with the regional person, and then the person that came in locally, like, it was going to be me or that guy.
Yeah.
It came down to that. Like, I was leaving or he was leaving.
Yeah.
One of us had to go. And gratefully, in my situation, Vince was still in play. He'd actually gone above regional. He was like the number 2 guy in the company at the time. And when I finally called him and said, so this is what's actually happening in Tyler, he was appalled and did something about it.
Yeah.
And the other guy had a leave of absence, and I was able to stick it out for a while.
Yeah, yeah. For me, it was something, it just, I remember walking in on a Saturday, maybe a month before or later, and this gentleman's doing a remote, and he was up for the job and didn't get the midday job.
Oh.
And I could hear him say something not nice about me. But, for me, it was something to where I was a different kettle of fish at the time as far as confidence goes, as far as how I dealt with stuff, and it just didn't turn out well. But, you live and learn on these things.
What did you learn from it? What was the biggest thing you learned?
I guess the biggest thing is that my confidence wasn't great at the time.
Okay.
And that translated into everything. So, which means when everything went down, I was demoted twice in about an hour, from middays to nights to weekends. And essentially...
In an hour?
Yeah.
Like in the course of one conversation?
Yeah. And
wow.
So what happened was my job consisted of going in daily and reassembling Paul Harvey for the air. That was it. It was humiliating. It was awful. The person who at the time was the sales manager sat me down and said, what can I do to help? Because this has been going on for a couple of months. I was still getting paid full pay, but I was doing that.
They were wanting you to leave.
Sure. And I had a loud discussion with the...
A loud discussion,
with the owner of the chain. And I just told him, I said, I didn't come here to get treated like this.
Yeah.
And he called me something, and I told him to do something physically impossible. And,
wow.
Yeah. And so anyway, the sales manager said, what can I do to help out? I said, why do you care? And he said, this just shouldn't go on. Mm. And I said, well, give me, a couple $1,000 and get me out of here. And he did.
Yeah. So did you come back to Tyler at that time?
I came back to Tyler. Rosanna and I got married.
Aw, so it does have a happy ending.
Yes. Yeah. We spent about a year and a half here, and then went back to Texas. And, the left turns in life, they happen.
Yeah.
In my radio career, if you just said I would be spending, over 40 years in Texas radio, I would say, no, I don't think so.
Yeah.
You're crazy. Or even if would I stay in radio for 47 years, especially, under the conditions that have developed. Not that they're horrible. It's just that the job market has shrunk. That's the way it is.
It's completely shrunk. Yeah. I mean, I totally understand what you're saying about left turns in life. I mean, I never thought I'd be in radio. I was a huge fan as a kid.
Yeah.
Loved listening to the radio. Recorded it on cassette tapes and all kinds. I still have
Me too.
Lucky Larry and Michael Storm on cassette.
Yeah.
I have my first air check, things like that.
Me too.
I thought whenever I graduated high school, I was going to go off to some big fancy school, get a 4 or 6, 8-year degree, something, because I was a smart kid. And I think all my teachers thought that too. And so when I ended up as a radio personality, there were some people that were kind of like, you're doing what? Like, why are you doing that? But I'll tell you what, I have had more fun in that career. There have been plenty of speed bumps and pains in the like whatever. I've also learned a lot about people and HR over the years in radio being a female. Like
absolutely.
It's been challenging in some ways. But I mean, I've had some extraordinary experiences. I drove a race car on a dirt track in Jacksonville, Texas.
There you go. I remember that.
You remember that? That was at the ranch. Yeah, that was so much fun. I did that. I've met some pretty phenomenal people. I had a chance to interview Garth Brooks a couple of times when I was at KNUE. You know, these are things that like 11-year-old Mandee would have never dreamed that I would do. So it's like it was such a weird left turn for me to do it, but it's ended up being so great. And I've developed we were talking about the TV thing last episode, a whole level of skill, like all these weird skills that, you know, are applicable to a lot of things. And who knew podcasting was going to be in my future? And
absolutely.
I didn't know.
You have this, you have the fact that, you know, 20 years ago, the fact that, you know, could you splice and dice and cut up a podcast at home? Well, yeah, but you need like thousands and thousands of dollars a year. Yeah. You know, I mean, I have the capability to do all of our web stuff on a desktop. I have it on my laptop at home. Yeah. You know, I can, you know, there have been times, you know, like part of my duties at the station, I'll do sports reports, and I can sit there and download everything and do everything at home if I had to get an early start in the day, you know?
Yeah, it's remarkable. Well, hey, I know we like to do a lightning round at the end, or we did last episode, and so do you want to give it a go on this episode too?
Yes.
All right, so your favorite food, you said, was Rosanna's Tacos. Are you going to stick with that?
Rosanna's Tacos. No, I'm going to stay with that.
You're going to stay with that?
But I've always said to her, and I mean it, and I say it explicitly and with a smile on my face, the woman has never made a bad meal. And she'll look at me and go, huh, yeah, I have. I go, well, I have not eaten a bad meal from her.
Well, what about your favorite movie or TV show?
You know, there's a couple of them. If you have not seen Fargo.
I haven't, but I hear good things.
Fargo is fantastic.
What's your favorite music?
If I listen to anything, it's classic rock.
Yeah.
I have this thing.
Bands? Do you have bands that you prefer? Or...
Zeppelin.
All right. Yep.
Of course. It's, you know, Zeppelin, Rush.
There's a great documentary on them I watched on some streaming channel years ago, and I liked their music, but then once I watched the documentary and I kind of learned more about their story and stuff, it's been a long time, so I can't quote anything of it. I just remembered having a really deep appreciation for like the way those guys work together.
Sure.
How much they liked each other. A lot of times bands don't like each other, you know, and they just, it was cool. They have a cool story.
There was a doc on, and I think maybe it was Roku, and it's Gordon Lightfoot.
Yeah. Great doc.
Warts and all. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You know, and he would admit to stuff that he did wrong, and that he was, you know, when he was younger, he drank way too much. And, you know, there was the thing with Kathy Smith, who was the person who gave John Belushi the hot shot when he died.
Yeah.
But Kathy Smith was also his girlfriend. So there's all this stuff going on with Kathy Smith on who she was. And
interesting.
Yeah. But I like the documentary on Gore, and I like things like that.
Well, as we progress with this, I think that there needs to be maybe some pop culture episodes, and hopefully we'll have some guests. You know, we've talked about some people that we've worked with over the years that we really admire and respect on the first couple of episodes. So, what do you think? Should we be game for some future conversations with our friends?
We need to get them in here, get their perspective, because sometimes you know they can give you a different look.
Anything else you want to add to this conversation for the time being, Chuck?
I do not. I think it's time for us to exit the Unknown Morning Show. This has been another episode of The Unknown Morning Show.
I'm Mandee Montana.
And I'm Chuck McKinley.
This is our show to explore radio,
podcasting,
gear,
and the gearheads that use the gear,
and making money with a hot mic,
and other stuff in between.
We'd love for you to follow us on social media as well. Follow us on Facebook at The Unknown Morning Show and Instagram at The Unknown Morning Show. See us on YouTube at The Unknown Morning Show.
Thank you for listening to The Unknown Morning Show.
I'm Mandee Montana.
I'm Chuck McKinley. And remember, be kind and rewind.